the current funeral regulations in place, what cultural and social implications is this having on our country? I'm joined now by political and policy analyst at the University of Pretoria, Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, to discuss this matter. Prof, good evening and thank you for your time. Under lockdown level 5, level 4 and level 3, assemblies are banned, and pretty much meaning that we are forced to revise the way in which we interact with one another in private rituals, in intimacy, in trust and in solidarity. What is the impact of this for family members, for communities, for extended family?
It is extremely disruptive to all of the above. It's a disruptive moment for the way we acknowledge one another, for the way we greet, for the way we work, but most importantly for the way we bury, the way we send off our loved ones. Not only because of the restrictions of numbers, but with the curfew in the previous level lockdown, people were virtually restricted to particular times for burying. In fact, in many instances, they were even told you have to have buried by this or that date, you know. So it's a very disruptive moment, and you and I know how important the funeral moment, the funeral hour is in black communities. In some ways, I think the funeral was or is more important than even the church hour. Because unlike the church, where only those who go to church will go, funerals are attended by everyone. And funerals have become a cultural phenomenon in our country. People go there to express their culture, the dress sense, the oratory that goes on at funerals. It is a very important moment in black life, and that moment has been disrupted.
Why is it important in black community, particularly to comfort the bereaved? You know, if you, I was saying earlier on, if you miss a birthday celebration, if you miss a wedding, it can be understood, it can be explained. But in black culture, in black community, when you miss a funeral, you know, it's such a heavy thing, because we place a lot of value in the comforting of the bereaved.
Yes, we place a lot of value in the comforting of the bereaved, because we are a people beset with a lot of sorrow and a lot of tragedy and a lot of pain. And so the funeral becomes a culmination of the pain that defines black life in general. But it's not merely for comforting the bereaved, it's also because the funeral connects us to the departed, who in many African languages are actually called the living dead rather than the dead. So the funeral is that moment where we sort of reach out to them as they cross the threshold. So it becomes a very important moment of ritual, a moment of connection between the living and the dead. But in recent times, there has been more funerals than weddings and birthdays, to refer to what you said earlier. So the funeral had become the one stop. In the funeral, you would have, if you like, the funeral and the wedding and the birthday and the get-together all wrapped in one. So the funeral has become important in that sense, because it took the place of many, many other ceremonies which were becoming more and more scarce.
Now, in terms of what we heard earlier on from the traditional practitioner, he says, well, in days past, a funeral was actually an intimate moment just for the family. And we seem to have gone back to there. I mean, with a number of 50, it really does only allow the immediate family to have that intimate funeral or that intimate send-off. Would you say that is a plus?
Except that the intimate family we can talk of in former days was a much larger family. I mean, 50 is probably still too little, because what is family? Family is the village. The whole village came together when there was a death in a particular family, and that whole village would still be seen as being members of the family. Every member of the village would be seen as members of the family. So I still think that the number 50 is a little bit lower than the traditional funeral. That said, what we have to acknowledge, though, is that the funeral is a dynamic entity, even the black funeral. It has been changing in response to circumstances around it. So the urban funeral, in many ways, is very different from the rural funeral. The funeral of the 1950s in Sophia Town will probably be very different from the funeral of the 80s and the 90s in Avalon Cemetery in Soweto. So even the funeral is a dynamic entity, and what COVID-19 has done is simply to hasten the pace and intensity of change. But funerals will constantly change as and when demanded by the circumstances and context in which we find ourselves.